"If you listen to me, your father will walk again," said the beggar boy to the millionaire. Melissa Anderson was sitting on a bench in Freedom Park, New York City, when her tears finally stopped falling. Another failed doctor's appointment, another lost hope. Her father, the businessman Richard Anderson, had been in a wheelchair for 2 years, and she had already spent a fortune on the best specialists in the country. That's when she felt a presence beside her. Turning, she saw a boy who couldn't have been more than 12, wearing tattered clothes and with a determined gaze that contrasted with his fragile appearance. "Ma'am, you're Mr. Richard's daughter, right?" the boy asked in a steady voice. Melissa quickly wiped her eyes, surprised. How did this child know who her father was? "If you listen to me, your father will walk again," the boy said before she could respond. "Who are you?" "How do you know about my father?" Melissa replied warily, glancing around to see if anyone else was nearby. "My name is Tyler. I've lived on the street since I was 8. But I know things doctors don't. I know how to make your father walk again." Melissa was about to stand up and leave when Tyler continued, "Your father lost the use of his legs after he found out his brother stole half the family business, right? The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with him, that it's all in his head." Melissa's heart raced. That detail hadn't been shared with anyone. Only she, her father, and a few doctors knew the real cause of Richard's paralysis. "How do you know that?" she whispered, a chill running down her spine. Tyler sat beside her on the bench, his brown eyes gleaming with a seriousness that didn't match his age. "Because I hear people talking. I sleep near the clinic where your father was treated. I heard the doctors, they said his body is fine, but his mind is blocked. That he doesn't want to walk because he's afraid to face the world." Melissa studied the boy more closely. Despite his worn clothes and dirty face, there was something special about him. An intelligence far beyond his years. "And you think you can help where the best doctors have failed?" she asked, still skeptical. "I don't think I know," Tyler replied with conviction. "But you have to trust me, and let me meet your father." Melissa hesitated. It all seemed absurd. How could she bring a street kid into her home? What would her father think? What would James, the family's loyal butler, say? But something in Tyler's eyes touched her deeply. Maybe it was the desperation of 2 years without progress. Maybe it was the way he spoke with such certainty. Or maybe it was just a daughter's intuition, willing to do anything to see her father walk again. "If I take you to meet my father, do you promise you won't hurt him?" she asked, surprising herself with her own words. "I promise," Tyler said, extending his small, dirty hand. "Your father will walk again. You can trust me." Melissa shook the boy's hand and felt a strange energy pass between them, as if fate was aligning in some mysterious way. The drive to the Anderson mansion was quiet. Melissa steered her black Lexus while Tyler stared wide-eyed out the window. He had never been in a neighborhood as elegant as the Upper East Side. "Tyler, tell me more about yourself," Melissa said, trying to understand this enigmatic boy. "Not much to tell, ma'am. My parents died when I was little. I lived with my grandfather, but he passed away 4 years ago. Since then, I've been on the streets," Tyler said, his voice trying to sound strong but carrying a deep sadness. "And how did you learn about rehabilitation?" "My grandfather was a physical therapist. He worked for free helping poor people who couldn't afford treatment. He taught me many things before he passed. He said people only truly get sick when they lose the will to live." Melissa felt a lump in her throat. Those words echoed inside her like a bell. Richard had indeed lost the will to live after his brother Robert's betrayal. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. When they arrived at the imposing 3-story mansion, James opened the gate with an expression of surprise and disapproval. The 60-year-old butler had worked for the family for over 3 decades and had never seen Melissa arrive with a child in such dire condition. "Miss Melissa, who is this boy?" James asked, eyeing Tyler up and down with suspicion. "James, this is Tyler. He's going to help Dad," Melissa replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Help how, Miss Melissa? You know Mr. Richard is very fragile. We can't allow strangers—" "James," Melissa interrupted firmly. "We've tried everything. All the doctors said the same thing. Maybe it's time to try something different. The butler huffed, clearly displeased, but said nothing more. He had known Melissa since she was a child and knew once she made up her mind, there was no changing it. Tyler walked through the house, observing everything with curiosity, but showing no intimidation. The walls covered in expensive paintings, the fine wooden furniture, and the crystal chandeliers didn't seem to impress him as much as Melissa had expected. "Where's my father?" she asked. "In the study, as usual," James replied regretfully. "He hasn't left since this morning." Melissa led Tyler down the hallway to a dark wooden door. She knocked softly and heard her father's tired voice telling them to come in. Richard Anderson sat in his wheelchair in front of a large window overlooking the garden. Even at 65, he still carried the elegant posture that had marked him for decades as one of New York City's most respected businessmen. His gray hair was neatly combed, and he wore an impeccable suit, but his blue eyes had lost the spark Melissa remembered from her childhood. "Dad, I brought someone to meet you," Melissa said, entering the study with Tyler behind her. Richard turned his chair, his eyes widening at the sight of the boy. "Melissa, who is this child?" he asked, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. "Dad, this is Tyler. He says he can help you walk again." A heavy silence filled the study. Richard stared at Tyler, who stepped forward without fear or hesitation. "Mr. Richard, can I talk to you?" Tyler asked, his young voice contrasting with the seriousness of his words. "Son, I don't think you understand. I have an injury that—" "You don't have an injury," Tyler interrupted gently but firmly. "The doctors already said so. You stopped walking because you stopped believing it was worth it." Richard fell silent, stunned by the boy's words. "My grandfather taught me that our bodies follow what our minds tell them. If the mind gives up, the body does too," Tyler continued. "You gave up when you found out your brother stole your company." "How do you know about that?" Richard asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Because I watch people, and I can tell when someone's heart is broken, like mine was when my grandfather passed." Melissa felt tears welling in her eyes. It had been so long since she'd seen her father show any emotion. "Tyler, you said you can help. How?" she asked. The boy opened a worn-out bag he was carrying and pulled out some simple objects: rubber balls, elastic bands, a few smooth stones, and a crumpled notebook. "My grandfather taught me special exercises. They're not just for the body, they're for the soul too," said Tyler, arranging the objects on the floor. "But they only work if the person truly wants to get better." Richard observed the objects skeptically, but there was something about Tyler's calm and confident manner that intrigued him. "And what do you get out of this, boy?" asked Richard, his businessman instincts making him suspicious of hidden motives. "Nothing, sir. I just want to help. My grandfather always said that when we help someone heal, we heal a little too," Tyler replied sincerely. Richard exchanged a glance with Melissa. His daughter was clearly moved, and he didn't have the heart to disappoint her again. "All right," he said finally. "What do you want me to do?" Tyler smiled for the first time since he had arrived, and that smile completely transformed his youthful face. "First, you need to take off your shoes. We'll work on the connection between your feet and the ground." For the next hour, Tyler guided Richard through simple yet unfamiliar exercises. The boy didn't just focus on physical movements, but constantly spoke about hope, second chances, and the importance of forgiveness to move forward. To everyone's surprise, by the end of the session, Richard managed to slightly wiggle his toes for the first time in 2 years. Melissa covered her mouth with her hands, too emotional to speak. Even James, who had been discreetly watching from the doorway, seemed impressed. "This is just the beginning," said Tyler, gathering his things. "But you have to want to keep going. You have to believe it's worth fighting for." Richard looked at the boy with a mix of admiration and disbelief. "Tyler, where do you live?" asked Melissa. "Different places. It depends on the day," the boy replied matter-of-factly. "Do you have family? Someone who looks after you?" "No, ma'am, just me." Melissa's heart ached. How could such a young child be alone in the world? "James, prepare the guest room," she said decisively. "Mrs. "Anderson, are you sure?" asked the butler, still hesitant. "I am. Tyler will stay here during my father's treatment." Tyler looked at Melissa in surprise. "Ma'am, I can't accept that. I have no way to pay." "You'll pay by helping my father walk again," Melissa said with a smile. "That's the payment we want." That night, as Tyler took his first hot bath in months, Melissa spoke with her father in the library. "Dad, what do you think of the boy?" Richard was thoughtful, staring at his own legs. "It's strange, Melissa. For 2 years, I've felt nothing in my legs. Today, for a few moments, I felt sensations I'd forgotten," he admitted. "But I don't want to get my hopes up again." "Dad, remember when I was little and said I wanted to be a ballerina? You always told me never to give up on my dreams." "I remember," Richard said with a wistful smile. "Then don't give up now. That boy came into our lives for a reason." Richard nodded slowly. Maybe his daughter was right. Maybe it was time to try believing again. The next day, Tyler woke early and found Richard already in the office. The businessman had stayed up all night thinking about the boy's words. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson. Ready to continue?" Tyler asked energetically. "I am," Richard replied. And for the first time in 2 years, there was a new spark in his eyes. The second session was even more intense. Tyler brought new exercises and began talking about forgiveness while working on Richard's legs. "Have you forgiven your brother for what he did?" Tyler asked as he massaged Richard's calf muscles. "How can I forgive someone who stole my life?" Richard replied bitterly. "Because as long as you don't forgive, he's the one still stealing your life every day," Tyler said with a wisdom that impressed. "My grandfather taught me that holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." Richard fell silent, absorbing those words. "Your grandfather was a wise man." "Yes, he was. He said the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need forgiveness the most, because they're suffering inside too." During the exercise, Richard felt a twinge in his legs. Not pain, but life returning. "Tyler, I'm feeling something different," he said, emotional. "That's life coming back, Mr. Richard. But it has to be gradual. Our bodies need to remember how to have hope." Melissa watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes. It had been so long since she'd seen her father show any positive emotion. In the days that followed, a routine settled into the mansion. Tyler woke early, had breakfast with Richard and Melissa, and then began the rehabilitation sessions. The boy had brought a new energy to that house, which had been steeped in sadness for so long. James, initially resistant, began showing affection for Tyler. The boy helped with small household tasks and always thanked everyone sincerely. "Mrs. Margaret, can I help you with anything?" Tyler asked the cook, a woman in her 50s who had worked in the house for over a decade. "Of course, dear. You can help me peel these potatoes," Margaret replied with a smile. She had quickly grown fond of the boy. "Mrs. Margaret, do you have children?" Tyler asked as he worked. "I have 2, sweetheart, but they're grown now and live far away. You must miss them." "I do. But now I have you here to brighten my kitchen," Margaret said, playfully ruffling Tyler's hair. It was amazing how that boy could touch the hearts of everyone around him. There was a purity in Tyler that disarmed any resistance. By the 3rd week, Richard managed to move his entire legs for the first time. The progress was slow but steady. "Mr. Richard, today we're trying something different," Tyler said, preparing a new exercise. "What do you have in mind?" "We're going to work with happy memories. I want you to tell me about the happiest moment of your life." Richard thought for a moment. "It was when Melissa was born. I'd been at the hospital for days, waiting. When I finally held her in my arms, I felt like my life had meaning." "And how did you feel in that moment?" "Invincible, like I could conquer the world to give it to her." "Then I want you to imagine you're holding baby Melissa right now, and that you need to stand up to protect her from danger." Tyler guided Richard through the exercise, helping him relive that feeling of purpose and strength. During the process, Richard's legs moved with more coordination than ever. "Amazing," Melissa whispered, watching from hiding. "He's doing it." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. But not everything was rosy in the Anderson mansion. Robert Anderson, Richard's brother, had begun to worry about the rumors that Richard was improving. He'd managed to maintain control of the company during the 2 years Richard had been debilitated, and the possibility of his brother recovering terrified him. Robert was a 48-year-old man who had always been envious of his older brother's success. When he managed to divert half of the company's funds into his personal accounts, he thought he had finally gotten what he always wanted. Richard's paralysis had been an unexpected bonus that solidified his power. "I need to know what's happening in that house," Robert muttered to himself, pacing back and forth in his office. He decided to pay the Andersons an unexpected visit. "Robert!" Melissa exclaimed when she opened the door, clearly surprised and uncomfortable. "Hello, niece. I came to see how Richard is doing. I've heard some strange rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "That there's a child living here. That you're trying alternative treatments. I'm worried about you." Melissa knew Robert's concern was fake, but she couldn't deny him entry. After all, he was still a partner in the company and her uncle. "Dad is in the office," she said reluctantly. Robert walked through the house he had known since childhood, but it now felt different. There was a lighter energy in the air, as if the sadness that had hung over the place for 2 years was finally lifting. When he entered the office, he found Richard doing exercises with Tyler. His eyes widened at the sight of the boy. "Richard, who is this child?" Robert asked, trying to sound casual. "Robert," Richard said, pausing his exercise. "This is Tyler. He's helping me with my rehabilitation." "Rehabilitation?" Robert tried to hide the panic in his voice. "But the doctors said there was no chance of improvement." "The doctors were wrong," Richard said, with a smile Robert hadn't seen in years. "Tyler has different methods." Robert studied the boy carefully. There was something unsettling about how Tyler looked at him, as if he could see through his lies. "And who are his parents?" "Where did he come from?" Robert asked, his natural business suspicion rising. "Tyler doesn't have parents. He's staying with us during the treatment," Melissa answered, stepping into the office. "Melissa, don't you think it's dangerous to have a street kid living here? We know nothing about him." "I know enough," Richard said firmly. "I know he's helped me more in 3 weeks than all the doctors did in 2 years. Tyler stayed quiet during the conversation, but his eyes watched Robert with an intensity that made him uneasy. "Uncle Robert, you seem worried," Tyler finally said. "Of course I'm worried. Richard is my brother." "Really?" Tyler asked with an innocence that felt dangerous. "Then why do you seem scared at the idea of him getting better?" An awkward silence filled the office. Robert felt his blood run cold. "What a strange question for a child to ask," he said, forcing a laugh. "Of course I'm happy about any improvement in Richard's condition." "Then why are your hands shaking?" Tyler observed with the same unsettling innocence. Robert looked at his hands and realized Tyler was right. They were trembling. "I think I should go," Robert said quickly. "Richard, call me if you need anything." After Robert left, Richard grew thoughtful. "Tyler, why did you ask my brother those questions?" "Because he wasn't happy to see you getting better. And that made me curious," Tyler answered honestly. Melissa exchanged a worried glance with her father. She had always suspected Robert, but had never been able to prove anything. "Dad, maybe it's time we looked deeper into what happened with the company," she said cautiously. "Melissa, I don't want to talk about that now. I'm focused on getting better. But Dad, if Robert really stole from the company, we need to do something. One thing at a time, sweetheart. First, I want to walk again. We'll deal with the business matters later." Tyler silently observed the conversation, but his young mind was processing information the adults seemed to overlook. That night, when everyone was asleep, Tyler left his room and wandered through the house. He'd developed a habit of watching and listening, skills he'd learned living on the streets. Passing by Richard's office, he noticed a drawer slightly ajar. Curious, he peeked inside and saw a folder with company documents. He couldn't read well, but he recognized the name Robert Anderson on several papers. "Tyler?" a voice whispered behind him. The boy turned to see Melissa standing in the office doorway. "Sorry, Mrs. Anderson, I couldn't sleep." "It's all right. Neither could I," she said, stepping into the office. What were you looking at? These papers. Uncle Robert's name is on a lot of them. Melissa approached and examined the documents. They were the company's financial reports from the last 3 years. Tyler, can you read numbers? A little. My grandfather taught me the basics. What do you notice that seems odd here? Tyler pointed to some figures. Here it says a lot of money left the company, but it doesn't say where it went. Melissa felt her heart race. She knew enough about the family business to understand what those numbers meant. Tyler, you're very observant for a child. My grandfather always said the answers are right in front of us. You just have to pay attention. Melissa spent the rest of the night reviewing the documents with Tyler. To her surprise, the boy asked insightful questions that helped her better grasp the inconsistencies in the reports. Mrs. Anderson, does Uncle Robert have a lot of money? Tyler asked. Why do you ask? Because when he came here today, he was wearing a really expensive watch. My grandfather taught me to notice details about people. What kind of details? Uncle Robert was nervous but trying to hide it. People only act like that when they're afraid of being caught in a lie. Melissa looked at Tyler with growing admiration. The boy had extraordinary perception. Tyler, would you like to help me uncover the truth about my uncle? Sure, but I don't want this to interfere with Mr. Richard's treatment. It won't. In fact, it might even help. If we find out Robert really stole from the company, maybe that will give my father the motivation to keep fighting. In the days that followed, Tyler and Melissa worked like amateur detectives, investigating the company's finances while continuing the rehabilitation sessions. Richard's progress was remarkable. He could now move his legs with coordination and had begun feeling sensations he hadn't experienced in 2 years. Mr. Richard, today we're going to try something very special, Tyler said during a morning session. What do you have in mind? We're going to try to get you standing. Richard felt a mix of fear and excitement. Do you think I'm ready? Your body's been ready for weeks. It's your mind that's scared, Tyler said with his usual wisdom. Tyler positioned Richard in the chair and placed his small hands on the businessman's arms. Now I want you to think about the first time you saw your granddaughter, Tyler said. Richard smiled. Emma, Melissa's daughter, had been born 3 years earlier and was the light of his life. I remember it like it was yesterday. She was so tiny. And how did you feel? Renewed. Like I had a new reason to live. Then stand up to hug your imaginary granddaughter. Slowly, with great effort, Richard began rising from the chair. His legs trembled, but they held his weight. I'm standing, he whispered, too moved to believe it. Yes, you are, Tyler said with a radiant smile. And you can stay like that as long as you want. Melissa, who was watching from the doorway, began to cry with emotion. After 2 years in a wheelchair, her father was finally standing. Richard stayed on his feet for only a few seconds before sitting back down. But those seconds were enough to change everything. Tyler, how can I thank you? Asked Richard, his voice choked with emotion. You don't have to thank me, sir. Seeing you happy is the best gift. That afternoon, while Richard rested in his room, Melissa and Tyler continued investigating the company documents. Tyler, look at this, Melissa said, pointing to a report. Robert transferred a large sum to a personal account exactly 1 week before my father discovered the theft. And that's bad. It's very bad. It means he was preparing his escape before he was even caught. So he knew he'd be found out. Exactly. Which means he may have forced the situation so my father would discover it at the right moment. Tyler considered the information. Miss Melissa, Mr. Richard told me he found out about the theft while reviewing reports he normally wouldn't check. Why was he looking at those? Because Robert suggested he take a look. He said he'd found some inconsistencies that needed clarification. Tyler's eyes widened. So Uncle Robert made Mr. Richard discover his own theft? It seems so, but why? Because he wanted your father to be so shocked he wouldn't be able to react, Tyler said with unsettling insight. He didn't just plan to steal the money, he wanted to destroy Mr. Richard completely. Melissa felt anger rising inside her. If Tyler was right, Robert hadn't just stolen from the company. He had orchestrated the emotional destruction of his own brother. Tyler, we need to tell my father. Not yet, Miss Melissa. First, we need to be certain. And second, Mr. Richard isn't emotionally strong enough to handle this news. When do you think he'll be ready? When he can walk on his own, then he'll have the confidence to face anything. Another week passed, and Richard made extraordinary progress. He could stand for several minutes and even take a few steps with support. Robert visited twice during that time, always finding excuses to drop by. Each time he grew more nervous, seeing Richard's improvement. "Richard, don't you think you're pushing yourself too hard?" Robert asked during one visit. "Maybe you should accept your limitations." "Why should I accept limitations when I'm improving every day?" Richard replied, a strength in his voice Robert hadn't heard in years. "It's just, sometimes it's better not to set expectations too high, to avoid disappointment later." Tyler, who was present, watched Robert's reaction closely. "Uncle Robert, don't you want Mr. Richard to get better?" the boy asked with his usual innocence. "Of course I do," Robert snapped, but his defensive tone said otherwise. "Then why do you always tell him to give up?" Robert flushed with anger. "Boy, you don't understand anything about this situation. I understand that people who truly love someone root for their success, not their failure," Tyler replied calmly. Richard watched the exchange with growing interest. He was starting to see that Tyler might be right about Robert. After Robert left, Richard called Tyler for a private talk. "Tyler, you don't like my brother, do you?" "It's not that I don't like him, Mr. Richard. It's that I don't trust him." "Why?" "Because every time he comes here, you end up sad afterward. And people who truly love others don't make them sad." Richard fell silent, processing those simple yet profound words. "Tyler, you're a very special child. Where does such wisdom come from?" "My grandpa always said that when you suffer a lot, you learn to see things others don't. You learn to tell who's genuine from who's fake." "And have you suffered a lot?" "Yes, sir. Losing my grandpa was the hardest thing that ever happened to me. But he taught me that suffering can make us stronger, if we let it." Richard felt a deep connection with Tyler. Both had lost important people and were trying to find new meaning in their lives. "Tyler, you know you can stay with us as long as you want, right?" "I know, Mr. Richard, but once you're fully healed, I'll need to go on helping others." "Who said I'd let you leave?" Richard said with a smile. "I'm thinking of officially adopting you." Tyler's eyes widened, too emotional to speak. "You'd really mean that?" "Absolutely. You brought life back into this house, back to me. If you want, you can be my grandson in heart." Tyler threw himself into Richard's arms, crying with emotion. It was the first time in 4 years someone had offered him a real home. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. A few weeks later, Richard had taken his first steps without any support. The whole house celebrated, and even James got emotional seeing his boss walk again. "Mr. Richard, I think the time has come," Tyler said after a particularly successful session. "Time for what?" "For you to learn the whole truth about what happened to your company." Richard looked at Tyler curiously. "What are you talking about?" Melissa walked into the office just then, carrying a folder of documents. "Dad, Tyler and I found out some things about Uncle Robert that you need to know." Over the next hour, Melissa and Tyler showed Richard all the evidence they'd gathered. The documents proved not only that Robert had stolen from the company, but that he had carefully orchestrated how Richard would discover the theft. "He wanted to destroy me completely," Richard said, absorbing the magnitude of the betrayal. "He did," Tyler confirmed, "but he failed, because you're stronger than he imagined." Richard stayed silent for a long time, processing everything. "What do you think I should do?" "That's only for you to decide," Melissa said. "But now that you're walking again, you have the power to confront him." "Tyler, what do you think?" "I think you should forgive him, but not let him keep hurting others." "How so?" "Forgiving doesn't mean letting someone keep doing wrong. It means freeing your heart from hate, but still protecting others." Richard looked at Tyler with admiration. This 12-year-old boy had become not just his physical therapist, but his spiritual guide. "You're both right. It's time to face Robert." The next day, Richard called Robert and scheduled a meeting at the company's office. It would be the first time in 2 years Richard left the house. "Dad, are you sure you're ready for this?" Melissa asked, worried. "I am, and Tyler's coming with me." "I am?" Tyler asked, surprised. "Of course. You taught me to walk again. Now I want you to see how I'll use these legs to face my life." The offices of Anderson Industries were in downtown New York City, in a 20-story building. When Richard walked into the lobby on his own 2 feet, several employees stopped to stare, moved to see their boss recovered. Robert was in his office, formerly Richard's office, when his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Robert, Mr. Richard is here to see you." "Richard?" Robert turned pale. "Did he come in a wheelchair?" "No, sir. He's walking." Robert felt the world spin around him. If Richard was walking, it meant he hadn't just regained his mobility, but also the strength to fight back. When Richard entered the room with Tyler by his side, Robert tried to mask his shock. "Richard, what a wonderful surprise. You're walking." "Yes, I am, Robert. And we need to talk." Of course. Have a seat. And who's your young friend here?" "This is Tyler, the therapist who healed me." Robert glared at Tyler with a mix of anger and fear. That boy had ruined all his plans. "Richard, there's something important I need to tell you," Robert said, trying to take control of the conversation. "I've discovered some irregularities with the company's finances over the past few years." "I know, Robert. I've uncovered exactly what those irregularities were." "You know?" Robert swallowed hard. Richard placed a folder on the desk and opened it, revealing all the documents he, Melissa, and Tyler had reviewed. "I know you embezzled over $15 million from the company into personal accounts. I know you orchestrated how I'd find out about the theft, and I know you hoped that discovery would destroy me completely." Robert fell silent, unsure what to say. "You didn't just steal my money, Robert. You tried to steal my life. You tried to break me psychologically to ensure I'd never recover. Richard, you don't understand. I've always lived in your shadow. You were always the golden child, the brilliant businessman. I just wanted my chance. And you thought your chance depended on my destruction." Tyler watched the exchange quietly, absorbing every detail. "Uncle Robert, why didn't you just ask for help instead of stealing?" the boy asked. "Kid, you don't understand anything about the adult world," Robert snapped. "I understand that good people ask for help when they need it. Bad people steal and lie," Tyler replied calmly. Robert's face flushed with anger. "Richard, are you going to let a child insult me?" "Tyler isn't insulting you, he's just telling the truth," Richard said firmly. "So what do you plan to do now?" Robert asked, trying to sound defiant. Richard stood up, showing Robert he had fully regained his physical and emotional strength. "I'll give you 2 choices, Robert. First, you return every cent you stole and step away from the company voluntarily. Second, I hand this evidence over to the authorities and you face the legal consequences." Robert stared at the documents on the desk, knowing he had no way out. "And if I choose the first option? I forgive you and you can start fresh somewhere else. No grudges, no retaliation." "Why would you do that for me after everything I've done?" Richard glanced at Tyler and smiled. "Because I've learned that forgiveness isn't a favor we do for those who hurt us. It's a gift we give ourselves." Robert stayed silent for a long moment, weighing his options. "All right," he finally said. "I'll take the first option. I'll return the money and leave the company." "And Robert," Richard called as his brother turned to leave. "Yes? I hope you find a way to be happy without destroying others." After Robert left, Richard sat behind his old desk and looked at Tyler. "It feels so good to be back here. And how will it feel to run the company again?" "Actually, I've been thinking about making some changes," said Richard with a mysterious smile. "What kind of changes?" "I'm considering turning part of the company into a rehabilitation center, a place where people like me can find not just medical treatment, but also hope." Tyler smiled. immediately understanding Richard's vision. "And who's going to run this center?" "I was thinking of a partnership, an experienced businessman and a young therapist with revolutionary methods." "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Tyler, you changed my life. Now I want us to change other people's lives together." 6 months later, the Anderson Comprehensive Rehabilitation Center had become a benchmark in New York City. The method developed by Tyler, which combined physical exercises with emotional healing, was helping hundreds of people recover from different types of trauma. Richard had fully regained his mobility and returned to running the company, but now with a much greater purpose than just profit. The Rehabilitation Center had become the most important project of his life. Tyler, now officially adopted by the Anderson family, was studying formally, but continued developing his unique therapeutic methods. He had become known as the boy who heals hearts and received visits from doctors across the country interested in learning his techniques. "Tyler, are you happy with the life we have now?" Richard asked during a family dinner. "Very happy, Grandpa Richard," Tyler replied, using the affectionate title he had chosen for Richard. "And you don't miss life on the streets?" "No, but I feel I need to help the kids who are still out there," Tyler said thoughtfully. Melissa, who had taken on a leadership role at the Rehabilitation Center, smiled. "Actually, Tyler, I have a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "We got approval to open a special program for street kids. Would you like to help develop it?" Tyler's eyes shone with emotion. "Really? Really? After all, who better to help those kids than someone who's been through the same experience?" Tyler stood up from the table and hugged Melissa and Richard at the same time. "Thank you for believing in me when I was just a dirty kid in the park." "We're the ones who should thank you," Richard said. "You taught us that sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places." Margaret, who had become like a grandmother to Tyler, served dessert with tears in her eyes. "James, are you crying?" Tyler teased the butler. "I'm not crying, it's just allergies," James said, discreetly wiping his eyes. Everyone laughed, knowing James had grown as attached to Tyler as any family member. A year after their first meeting in the park, everyone's lives had completely changed. Richard had not only walked again, but found a new purpose in life. Melissa had discovered a passion for helping others through the Rehabilitation Center, and Tyler had found not just a family, but a way to use his own pain to heal others. Robert had returned all the stolen money and moved to another state where he started a new life as a teacher. Surprisingly, he had sent Richard a letter months later, thanking him for offering forgiveness instead of punishment. The Rehabilitation Center had become a model for other institutions, and Tyler had begun training other therapists in his unique methods. "Grandpa Richard, can I ask you something?" Tyler said during a walk in the park where they had met. "Of course, my grandson. Do you think my grandfather would be proud of me?" Richard stopped walking and looked at Tyler with affection. "I'm sure he's very proud. You took everything he taught you and multiplied it into love for others. Sometimes I feel like he's still with me, guiding me. And he is. The love of those we lose never dies. It stays inside us forever." They continued walking in silence, each lost in their thoughts. "Tyler, can I confess something?" said Richard. "Of course. The day you told me I would walk again, I didn't believe you at all. I thought you were just a dreamy kid." "And what made you change your mind?" "Your eyes. There was so much certainty in them, so much hope. And I desperately needed hope. My grandfather always said hope is like a seed. If you plant it in the right heart, it always grows. He really was a wise man. He was. And so are you. That's why you were able to teach me so much about forgiveness and turning pain into love." Richard smiled, grateful he had met Tyler that day in the park. "You know what amazes me most about you, Tyler?" "What?" "You could have become bitter after everything you went through, but you chose to become someone who heals others." "Well, my grandfather taught me we always have a choice. We can let suffering destroy us or use it to grow." When they returned home, they found Melissa preparing a presentation for an international medical congress where she would speak about Tyler's methods. "How's it going, sweetheart?" asked Richard. "Good. I'm trying to explain scientifically something that's actually much more than science. It's love, Tyler said simply. What works in my method isn't just the exercises. It's the love we put into every movement. Melissa stopped writing and looked at Tyler. You're right, that's exactly what I was trying to explain. Mrs. Anderson, can I make a suggestion? Of course. Instead of just using words, bring some of the people who were healed to share their stories. Sometimes doctors need to see to believe. Melissa smiled. Once again, Tyler had offered a simple solution to a complex problem. Tyler, would you like to come with me to the Congress? After all, you're the creator of the method. Me, but I'm just a kid. You're a kid who developed a revolutionary healing technique. Doctors from all over the world want to meet you. Tyler looked at Richard for guidance. Go, my boy. The world needs to know your work. 3 months later, Tyler stood on the main stage of the International Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine in Boston, sharing his story with over 2,000 doctors from 40 different countries. My grandfather always told me the medicine of the future would heal not just the body, but also the soul, Tyler said into the microphone, his young voice echoing through the silent auditorium. I didn't invent anything new. I just reminded doctors of something they already knew, that people need to feel love to heal completely. The audience erupted in applause. Many doctors stood, moved by the simple yet profound words of the young American boy. After the presentation, Tyler was surrounded by journalists and doctors, eager to learn more about his methods. Tyler, do you plan to study medicine when you grow up? Asked a reporter. I plan to study everything that can help me help others, Tyler replied. Medicine, psychology, physical therapy, whatever it takes. And what's your biggest dream? Tyler thought for a moment. My biggest dream is that one day, rehabilitation centers won't be needed anymore. That all people will be born knowing how to care for each other with love. More applause filled the auditorium. When they returned to the United States, Tyler had become a small international celebrity. Universities around the world wanted to study his methods, and he had received invitations to give lectures in several countries. But what made him happiest was seeing the growth of the rehabilitation center in New York City. Hundreds of people had been helped, and many of them now worked as volunteers, assisting other patients. Tyler, you've changed not just our family, but an entire community, said Melissa during the dinner celebrating the center's one-year anniversary. We changed together, Tyler corrected. I just planted the seed. You all made it grow. Richard stood up from the table, walking effortlessly to where Tyler was seated. My grandson, I'd like to make a toast, he said, raising his glass. Everyone at the table stood up. 2 years ago, I was a broken man, without hope, confined to a wheelchair not because of physical problems, but because of sorrow. Then a brave boy appeared and told me I would walk again. And I didn't just walk again, I started living again. Richard paused, emotional. Tyler, you didn't just heal me. You taught me that true strength comes from love, that forgiveness is the best medicine, and that sometimes the most important teachers come in the most unexpected packages. Everyone raised their glasses, moved. Now I have an announcement to make, Richard continued. What announcement? Asked Melissa, curious. I've decided to donate half my fortune to create a foundation that will bring Tyler's methods to underprivileged children across the country. Tyler nearly dropped his juice glass. Grandpa, you don't have to do that. Yes, I do, because I've learned that money only has value when it's used to do good. And what will the foundation be called? Asked Margaret, who had been invited to the special dinner. The Living Hope Foundation, Richard said, because that's what Tyler brought into our lives. Living hope. 2 years later, the Living Hope Foundation had opened 15 rehabilitation centers across the United States. Tyler, now 14, divided his time between formal studies and training new therapists. He had grown, but he kept the same pure essence and wisdom that had impressed Richard at their first meeting. Tyler, you know you can choose any career you want, right? Melissa said during a conversation in the mansion's garden. I know, Mom, Melissa, Tyler replied, using the affectionate title he had chosen for her. And what do you want to be when you grow up? Tyler smiled, looking at the garden where so many therapy sessions had taken place. I want to be someone who helps others remember they can walk, even when they think they've lost their legs forever. That's not a profession, Tyler. Of course it is. It's the most important profession in the world. It's the profession of restoring hope. Melissa hugged Tyler, proud of the special boy who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. That night, Tyler was in his room studying when he heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he said. Richard entered, walking with his usual elegance. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course, Grandpa." Richard sat on the bed beside Tyler. "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone." "What is it?" "The day you told me I would walk again, I was planning to give up on everything. I was thinking about it not wanting to live anymore." Tyler looked at Richard seriously. "But what made you change your mind?" "You. Your eyes held so much certainty, so much life. And I thought, if a child who lost everything can still have hope, maybe I can too." "Grandpa, want to know a secret?" "What?" "The day I met you, I was also thinking about giving up. I was tired of living on the streets, tired of being alone." "And what made you change your mind?" "You. When I saw how much he was suffering, I remembered what my grandfather always used to say, that the best way to heal our own pain is by helping to heal someone else's." Richard hugged Tyler, moved. "So we saved each other." "Yeah, and we've saved so many other people together." "And we'll save many more," said Richard with a smile. The end of the story. Now tell me what you thought of this touching story. Do you believe Tyler made the right decision by trusting his intuition to help Richard? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.